Hi everyone, good to see you. Good to see that there are some people in the room. You never know with webinars if people who sign up, if they actually arrive and participate. But it looks like there's a lot of people in here. That's great. And so thanks for joining. And today we're going to discuss about the future of how internal communication will look. And with me I have Lau, who would normally be traveling the world, sharing knowledge about internal comms. But thanks to the current situation, you are grounded.
I'm spending a lot of time in my kitchen, yeah.
Yes, and I mean, that was a great opportunity for me to invite you and see if you could share some of the insights that you have from around the world. Sure. But Lau, why don't you introduce yourself while I find the presentation?
Yeah, good use of time. So good morning, everyone. As Jonas says, my name is Lau, and I work for an organization called Connect Minds. And that's exactly what we do. We have a peer learning network where essentially we have hundreds of people who manage channels and communications and change in large organizations. And normally we would meet in groups every 3 to 4 months in the various cities and have groups meeting and discussing their challenges and their opportunities and helping each other out. And we've been doing that for 15 years in a number of countries in Europe and North America. But as Jonas said, and as you all know very well, we're stuck at home. So at the moment, we're doing it all online, but with a view to actually go back and meet each other again, face-to-face meetings and share knowledge, share experiences, and also share some of the learnings which come out of the not so successful projects. And I think that's sometimes the most interesting ones. And today I'm going to be sort of chipping in because obviously with us having conversations with, as I said, hundreds of large organizations around the world every quarter, we hear a lot about what's going on, and particularly right now where so many things are up in the air and so many things are being questioned. Does yesterday's rules still apply? And nobody really has the final conclusions or answers yet. So we're trying to listen in to see what people are trying out at least and share it with our members. So thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for coming. And one of the other things we have to say is that I will actually be joining you as a group leader for in the fall to facilitate some groups in Germany, especially Germany. Yeah. So let's move on to me. Some of you might know me, some of you might not know me, but this is me. I work with, you could say I try to make organizations more human, and the way I do this is to work with communication in a way that brings the human in front of people, and it helps humanize organizations. So in everything I do, it's actually about bringing the human in front in the organization. And instead of me talking a lot about who I am, I've actually asked one of my good friends, Crystal. I don't know if you know Crystal, but Crystal knows a lot about you and me on social media, because she can look into everything I post on LinkedIn, and then she will profile who I am, and I think she did a pretty well job, but maybe it's a bit too honest. But this is me, and I think if you look at it, looks like it makes sense that I'm working in my own company right now. And if you'd like to contact me, here's some help on how to do that. One of the things that might be a bit too honest is that she also reveals that I might be a bit late to meetings, which might be right. So if you're looking for a consultant who can motivate others but might be a bit too late at meetings, then I might be the right guy, apparently. Anyway, good. But let's have a look at the internal comms and the future of internal comms. There are 4 things we should take a look at today, I think. And one of the things is to look at the evolution, actually. And the evolution is just you just have to go 15 years back in time to talk about evolution in internal comms, because that was where this happened, where people got a smartphone and things just went, you could not say wrong, but went in different directions than we were used to. Then we have to look at our opportunities. And I would say this situation that we are in right now actually, I think, has given us in internal comms a lot of opportunities. And then we should have a look at where to focus in the future. And maybe we should try to have a look at these guys here, because they could maybe reveal a bit about where the value is in internal comms. And then I will try to speak a bit about how I have tried to work with moving internal comms from creating output to impact in my roles in internal comms in corporates. And we'll take a look at this picture here. Good. Let's start with the evolution. So this is us. This is our life right now. We all have the smartphone here, and this is the way we experience the life today. So through what's that, 9-inch screen or whatever. I think one of the things that happened in 2007, actually, when Steve Jobs he showed, or he revealed that the iPhone is on its way, was that suddenly internal comms did not have this monopoly to communicate anymore internally in organizations, because now suddenly people had a phone with apps with access to a lot of other communication or content. And that could be a distraction, but that could also be a competition to the way we will communicate internally. Then we have new generations coming up. These are my two boys who saw a phone when they were traveling in New York, and the big one is telling the little one that this is actually a phone that is working, and he was quite surprised about that, because he hadn't seen such a thing anymore before. So they also have different expectations. And just this morning, the big one, he told me that he was really disappointed by a YouTuber who was only posting once a week right now, and that's just not enough communication for him. So I just have to see, there's someone who just had some technical issues. Yeah, okay, good. And then we have the evolution of channels and devices. I mean, when I was a kid, the best, the most impressive thing I experienced was that I got cable TV. So I went from 1 to 30 channels to choose from, and we also, obviously, I had a VCR, and I got an Atari, this little gaming console. But if you look at the generations after me, I mean, what they have a wealth of channels and devices to choose from. So it's a totally different game, and it's something we have to keep in mind when we work with communications as well, is that, you know, they can just go somewhere else if what we do is too boring and too irrelevant. So this is a new situation for internal comms people, and this is actually the feeling that or the expectations, you could say, that people would like to have today. It's just having a device that knows you and can push you the relevant information at the relevant time. And this Google playlist is just a good example of that, because this guy is sitting in the airport, obviously, and he's going to be, or he has been pushed a playlist that says flying stress-free. That's the thing we should aim for in internal comms. And one of the other challenges that we see today is that, you know, speed is just going up. The speed of information is going up. The communication, computation, everything is just going so fast, and there's a huge need for innovations, as we see right now during COVID-19, especially that we have to figure out what to do right now. And that's where, I mean, one of the challenges that we see right now is that we can't really solve the challenges that we have today with a mindset from the 20th century. And when I talk about the mindset from the 20th century, I often show people this iceberg of ignorance, because we still have a very, in many organizations, we have very siloed and very top-down structured organization. And this is something we as internal communicators should be very aware about, because if we are only sitting together with the executives, we might be blindsided because we might not see the problems that the staff is actually facing. We have to help creating this listening organizations instead of informing people about what executives think. I think that's really important for us, and we have the technologies available right now. So it's really a matter of figuring out how can we connect the organization so that they can make sense of everything that's happening, rather than expecting an executive to know everything and post the wisdom once a week in a newsletter. Last year, Kyla in my network in LinkedIn, she posted an interesting question. She asked, what's the thing you hate hearing the most in comms? And I think this is really related to what you call a 20th century mindset of what you expect from internal communication. And I mean, she doesn't have a big network, but you could see here that she got 400 comments on that, and people sharing all kinds of stuff that frustrated them in working with internal comms, and being frustrated by people thinking something of what internal comms is actually delivering. And you can see this is just a couple of examples that people shared. I especially like these three. So did someone tell internal communications about this as an afterthought? You know, we forgot about that they existed. So let's see if they can help us fix the things that we just published. Or our, insert non-HQ location here. Employees don't need to hear all this. Especially, I mean, that's something I've experienced myself, is that, yeah, it's not something that people in the stores, they would like to hear about. I mean, who would know? I mean, that's back to the iceberg of ignorance, right? Because maybe they would actually like to hear about what's going on in the business. And the last part, you can do the flower arranging in response to comms to support a significant change program. I would say I haven't been there myself, but I have definitely faced a challenge where there has been an expectation for internal comms people to deliver the awareness part, and then the change program or the change people somewhere else think they should take over and do the other stuff. And that's something we have to work with, and I think we can take it to a better level in the future. What do you think, Lau? Is this something you've heard as well?
Yes, absolutely. I think the whole you're quite right in saying that at the moment it's not joined up properly. It's kind of disjointed, and I think there's a lot of kind of open questions at the moment around how as communicators we can work better with some of the stakeholders around the business in terms of tying all these initiatives up. I've seen some really interesting examples of, because one of the weaknesses, and it's not to criticize people for lack of those skills, because it's just not a skill that communicators would naturally have, but is that of using data better. You know, we sit with our analytics tools and we get a lot of numbers out, but really what we need to know is data from analysts who know how to crunch that data, because really if we're to plan things like this, we need to know about behaviors, we need to know about how the different divisions work together and all that kind of stuff, where you don't get that out of a SharePoint analytics tool. You get that out of joining up different data sets and some qualitative stuff. That's something you need analysts for. So I think there's so much potential there, but not something we can necessarily all do without help from others. So, but yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point.
Good. So let's see how we can move up a step and try to see how can we actually create impact. But I think one of the three of the challenges that we have faced, it's both. These are some challenges I think we face internally in internal comms, but also in the organization in general. Is that we sometimes focus a bit too much in silos still, especially also in internal comms. So we focus a lot about how can we communicate this, and I'll give you some examples of what I mean by this. But also, as we just saw, other people in the business have some certain expectations of internal comms, and that's something we have to work on and try to see if we can change. Then sometimes we settle for less. So we settle, for instance, if our boss or the executive is happy with what we do, that's okay with us, then we just do that instead of pushing the limits. And then we also sometimes, to be honest, we might miss out on some capabilities. Actually, I think one of the capabilities we need to step up on is understanding digital and the platforms that are out there that can help us achieve what we want. But also opportunities. I mean, locked in. Yes, that's what many of us are right now, still working at home. And I think a lot of internal communicators, they can see that their position has really been become really, really relevant right now. They're able to show what they are able to do. And I did a survey myself, and I could see that on LinkedIn, and I could see that there was some great examples of what they could do right now, and that they had the opportunity to try out new things. So I really hope that this sticks to the organization, that people can see the value of internal comms. What is your expectation? What is your experience, Lau, about this? What do you hear around the world?
In terms of
in terms of COVID-19 comms and the opportunities for internal communicators.
Yeah, I think, I mean, initially there's been a lot of firefighting going on. I think people are just trying to make sense of it all, and they've been so busy helping to join up all the dots in the organization, because suddenly you have, maybe in some cases thousands of employees who've never worked from home. They have to be helped to be set up, and there was no support set up for that. So often the communicators are called in to help with that. But then, certainly as we are having, when we get together now as groups and start talking about, so what have we been doing? Certainly my recommendation, and I can see what some are trying to get out of this, maybe slightly cynically, but you've got to take an opportunity when it's there, is to actually sort of highlight how important this function is. Because, we have a habit of just delivering. We do all this stuff, we make it all happen. I say we collectively, I know there might be exceptions, but I think very often we do all of that, and then afterwards we're like, okay, that's it, on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, okay, we've actually done some pretty remarkable stuff here. Can we just maybe make sure that those who make the decisions actually see that? So I think I'm seeing a lot of teams trying to find ways of maybe reposition themselves, because they've also eyed some opportunities in terms of, now I should, there are certain things that I did before. I'm just too busy to do it now, and maybe it makes you realize that some of the things you spent a lot of time doing weren't necessarily the biggest value drivers in the organization. Just because you've done it for 10 years doesn't necessarily mean, some things are obviously related specifically to the crisis and they'll go away, but there are other things where you might say, actually, this could be adopted and used going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really, really important to stop up and evaluate afterwards, see what we've learned, what we can continue to do. By the way, I forgot to say that you're welcome to ask questions in the chat, and Lau, I hope you can moderate, because for some reason I can't see the screen while I'm presenting, so I can't see the chat while I'm presenting, because I'm sharing my slides.
So far, it's a lot of positive thumbs up kind of remarks. So
okay, great. So
but you can just post questions as well, absolutely.
Yeah,
and I'm looking in.
And now you're the moderator, all right?
Yeah.
Good. All right. So opportunities. I mean, one of the things that I really, really think is important that we have to focus on is to connect everyone. It's not about to reach everyone. Please focus on connecting everyone. We have the technology to do that. It's about getting people together and enable them to connect with each other and speak with each other and make sense of everything what's going on, because we can't, as internal communicators, I mean, we can't know everything, and we can't know everything that people need to know. So let's focus on connecting everyone. And I think, again, this crisis that has shown how important it is to focus on that. And I know it's a big cost issue in big corporates, but this is where we should, this is our number one challenge and something we should fight for. Then also we have the opportunity to strengthen the corporate culture, the engagement, and build trust. And we can, by doing that, we can actually deliver real business value. It's a bit provocative to say real business value, but I'll try to give you an example on how that works. So if we go back to what I talked about earlier on the 20th century mindset, a 20th century mindset for me in internal comms is this. You can focus on producing a lot of information that you want people to read, which also mostly is, corporate communication, like someone writing something in the communications department and sending it out, someone sending a newsletter out or something. That's what I define by being corporate. And we do that a lot today, and we should not do it. We should just do less of it. Instead, we should try to see if we can focus on this instead. So how can we facilitate conversations in the organization so that it becomes more authentic, but also that it inspires people to take action? That's what we really want. That's what we should do. That's what I think we should do in the future. Then also we should focus a lot more on becoming proactive than being reactive. So what you talk about, Lau, earlier on, is that we should really, I mean, COVID-19 is a great opportunity for us, but it's still something we react to. So it's still just something that's happening that we are reacting to. What we want to be is to be proactive, so that we can become a part of the strategic goals of the company, so that we are not just waiting for something to happen, so that we can communicate. And that's where this little robot comes in, because I think there are a lot of digital platforms out there that can help us do that. And this is also something, I mean, back to the capabilities I talked about. It's really important for us to understand what kind of digital platforms are out there that can help us. I'll try to give you an overview. I mean, a lot of you know that, intranets, that's our, for many of us, that's our home base. But then we also have some challenges that are able to take it a step further, to focus on people on the front line, like Actimo, Atobi, and Relisys, who can automate learning videos and so on, so that it's based on what you actually know. These platforms are able to close knowledge gaps in the front line. So that, for instance, let's say you are working in a phone company selling phones, and you answer some quizzes, and if Actimo, for instance, identifies a knowledge gap of you don't know enough about the new Samsung phone, well, you'll get pushed a YouTube video of 1 minute that will help you close this knowledge gap, and then you'll end up selling more Samsung phones. Relisys, for instance, Atobi is able to give people missions, so selling in stores becomes more engaging, and all these things. So there's a lot of things to. I think that there could be a lot of benefits of thinking that way as well. We have podcasts. Podcasts in internal comms is still a bit challenging, because there are not really. I haven't seen a great distribution tool yet. I guess it's about to come, but still it's a bit challenging. Video. I mean, we've done video for some time right now. I think we are still trying to figure out what's the best format for video internally, but I'll give you an example later on. But I think this is something we still try out, because in the beginning everybody was hooked on video, thought video would be the new great thing. But what we saw is that a lot of people, they just took the thing that they wrote, the article they wrote, and then they put someone on, they shot someone on a white wall, or a talking head, just saying the things that would normally be in an article. And that's not a good way to do video. So we have to find ways to do videos more engaging. Also, there are some great barriers, or big barriers, in watching videos. So a 30-second video could actually be more difficult to view than reading an article, because you have to figure out how to turn on your headphones and all these kind of things. Then we have newsletters. Popular, for instance, or Sway. Sway can make it a bit more look a bit more pretty. Popular can make it very, very targeted and relevant. We have all these Mentimeter, Slido. I guess a lot of you know these kind of tools already, but they can help making presentations more engaging, for instance. Then we have all these internal social media tools. There's a lot of different tools to choose from. Obviously, we have Yammer, that most of you might know about, but there are also a lot of other vendors out there. Digital signage is something we like to use at factories and so on. And then we have a lot of listening tools. Unfortunately, it's not so big here, but it's really important. I think Peakon, for instance, a pulse survey tool that is monitoring people's well-being at work and the employee experience that they have, is really important, because it can help give us a clue about if what we do has an effect. Because they do weekly, bi-weekly, monthly surveys, and that's really interesting for us to look into. At the same, and I think My Analytics as well, which many of you have because you have Microsoft, that can look into your behavior, who do you collaborate with, how many meetings do you do, and all these kind of things. Productivity tools, good for us to know about, because we might be the ones who are going to implement them. Then we have external social media, very important also, because external and internal is going to merge. So a post on LinkedIn from the CEO is most likely going to be liked by a lot of people from inside the company as well. Then we have employee advocacy tools, who can amplify messages from the company externally. I would say I work in that field as well, but I'm really, really careful with these kind of tools, because I think you should be, because no one would like to read a lot of corporate posts on LinkedIn. People still should be authentic. they should be aware of their personal brand and share stuff that is about them and not so much about the company. And then we have coming up a lot of tools like Google Home, HoloLens, virtual reality, this watch, and so on, that we haven't even started thinking about, but which is going to be that we have to start, I think, focus on as well. All right. Any thoughts, Lau?
Yeah, if you go back just one slide, there's
Any
a couple of
questions?
things. Yeah, let's see. I don't think there has been. Comments, but not questions at the moment. So they're all
okay.
Yeah. No, I just think with this array of tools, and it's going the same way. I don't know if any of you have seen that splendid map that someone started in 2011. I can't remember, for marketing technologies, and it started in 2011 with about 1,000 products on it, and people said, "Gosh, that must consolidate one day. There's way too many products in the market. There can't be that many. They'll buy each other, and we'll have a few big ones." And they've done it every year, and last year there was 6,000 products on the map. And I'm not suggesting it because there's not as much money in internal comms yet, but I think some of those categories are interesting, but there's a fear of jumping in and doing it just because everybody else is. And for example, with you talk about podcasts and videos, I think the criteria applies to any type of communication, that you should look at what it is you're trying to achieve, what is the outcome you're looking for, and then choose the medium, the format, the channel that's lending itself best to it. Pumping out videos, as you say, with the same content as you would have written in an article, is actually annoying because you've got to listen to it. And sometimes it's it's difficult in an office environment, certainly. And there are also some of the others, and I actually think the big elephant there is external social media, and that's really been the here's a question, so I'll come up with that in a second. But I've certainly seen teams that, because they've been frustrated that the external social media channels have been used mainly as a marketing broadcast platform by the marketing department, but actually they're finding that, for example, for genuine employee advocacy, that's exactly where they should be, but internal comms haven't really had a role in that, and they then try to have this hybrid approach to it, where actually because of course initially the company would, especially if you're in a sort of highly regulated industry, if you're a bank, or especially like pharma companies, they don't want their employees to say anything because if they break any rules, there's all of that. But then if you actually, rather than stop them from saying it, I mean, I had one of the members in one of our groups recently says, well, we're being asked to go out and broadcast all this stuff about how wonderful this place is to work, and then afterwards they say, but if you say anything wrong, we'll sack you. And that's kind of so that doesn't really motivate the but there's some really interesting things there, and I think that's going to be one of the drivers for actually making internal and external get closer to each other. Not just social media, but because there's a lot of so there's a couple of questions here. So Frank is asking, to which extent is collaboration and productivity a comms thing?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Frank. I think we have to be careful to because I thought, when I was director in communication, I thought that would be something we should take over, but what I quickly found out was that I wouldn't get the resources to do that. So that was something I didn't take on. So I think where that left us was to focus on the adoption part and helping people being aware of that this is existing, and taking that further with the conversation of, I talked about it, for instance, with our CFO in Arla at that time, who was really keen on driving the adoption of notes. So we helped her as part of our help on internal comms in finance, to help her drive the adoption of notes in that division. But I think it is really difficult to take on this monster in internal comms if you don't have the resources. And I think it's something, again, that shows that maybe it's difficult to think very silo oriented on that it's challenging the silo, because this is a thing that's really interesting for both IT, internal comms, and HR to get together on. Yeah.
You might argue that productivity tools, if they're any good, they should be pretty intuitive. But I've heard some I wouldn't call them horror stories, but some pretty predictable, stories that have happened out of lack of planning a good comms scenario for something like this. When things blew up a few weeks ago, of course, there was things that were bound to go wrong. But you had some organizations where they'd carefully been planning this rollout of certain tools, but communication hadn't been involved at all. And when push came to shove and they had to do it overnight, there was no support to actually, make people out there realize how to, get started and things like that. So
yeah.
There is another question here. How do we make it more interactive? Where can the discussions regarding strategies and so on be? So out of this whole landscape ecosystem of tools, I guess Ulrika is asking, how can we actually make all of this things like discussing strategic considerations. So if you want to engage the workforce in actually discussing some of the planning for the future of the company, and I guess Ulrika, you can say yes or no if that's what you mean. But how can we make that more interactive and engage the workforce using some of all of this?
It's a good question. I think you can do it in many different ways, but I think one of the things you should not do is to anticipate that you know the exact question or the exact answer to this, because I think a lot of the things is that you have to again see if you can engage people in the business to come up with such suggestions. For instance, on Yammer, I had when I worked at Danish Rail, for instance, I think you remember that, Lau. Actually, we came up with a social media platform where we engaged the frontline staff in sharing stories about what they did. In terms of what they did in terms of our values. So what do you do to make people simple and so on? So we got a lot of stories from the frontline about this. So they were telling their own stories about what they did to this. And I think we could do something similar when we would like to engage people in strategy. But engage them instead of trying to push out a lot of content about strategy, because strategy from our point of view is just really, really boring. So let's see if we can engage people in the front line.
Well, I guess that, strategy and boring is, I guess it's because of the way we do it. I mean, I think it's 6 or 7 years ago you did that, or maybe even more. That it was one of the first social platforms I saw in any company, and I still talk about that story.
Yeah.
Says a bit about how many times I've been there. But but the way you framed the conversation, because of course the context, without going into too much detail, was that there was a lot of not so good stuff going on in the railway company at the time. A lot of bad press for the company and a lot of bad emotions going around amongst the staff. And what you framed with that, initially you said this is the place for sharing good stuff. This is the place for sharing all the positive stuff. So you didn't force people to only talk about what you wanted, but you said, you kind of framed the conversation, because you said otherwise it could have just been an avalanche of negativity. But
Ulrika, I will come back to that because I have some examples later on. But I can already see that I'm still a noob in webinars. So for the 40 minutes that I anticipated this webinar is going to take is not going to hold up. But fortunately, we are recording this session. So if you have something you have to do in 7 minutes, you can leave, and you will get pushed the video later on. I will put it on YouTube. Anyway, so sorry about that, but I'm also still learning about this webinar thing. Good. Where to focus in the future? This is actually where I think this is my mindset. And I think internal comms, the great thing about internal comms is that internal comms can actually be a lot of different things. It's a matter of how you define it. And I'm really focused on it. When I think back in time, also based on the Danish Rail story, I've always been focused on how can we help giving people a great experience at work, so that it spills over to how people service our customers. Because I see the employee experience as such as something that is actually creating the customer experience, or the customer experience depends on the employee experience. So engage people at work, yes, that will in the end end up in people giving a greater customer experience. And I think some of the things we should focus on, two of the things we should focus on, is to make sure that people feel that they have the freedom to act. and they are allowed to act, and they are allowed to do the right things in the right situation, and that they feel that there's a flow, that they have a flow of, for instance, timely information. They have the ability to reach the people they need in order to get stuff done and so on. That's something we can help with. And I tend to see internal comms as something that should serve within this frame. I think we should think of internal comms more than being, co-creating some great moments at work, some great experiences in the right moments at work. So let's say, for instance, the first impression. I mean, if we tell a story about ourselves and our employer value proposition that we are so innovative, well, how do we actually give people the impression that we are innovative when people meet us on the webpage first or on social media, when they come to the first job interview, when we say you're not the one we have chosen, so how can we turn these people into brand ambassadors instead? And when people meet up the first day at work, so think about what's your stake in that as in internal communications. Maybe you don't feel that you have a stake in it, but maybe you should have, because there are some other people in the business who are doing this in a crap way that's not aligned with the brand. So this is again an example of, let's try to reflect on that. And let's not just start putting ourselves into a little box where it's about posting a lot of information. Let's see if we can broaden that scope and sit in a bigger box in the future. And there's a lot of other, Lau?
Yeah, one important thought on that, and I'll keep it short, but is actually that, in order to get out of that box, to be allowed out, you obviously need some kind of hook to make sure that you're not just getting get back to doing what you've done all the time. And I think there's some really interesting things you can do in terms of just looking at, for example, which managers are having a hard time, which leaders are struggling to reach their targets and their KPIs, and actually saying, okay, we can. I mean, HR, for example, I heard of one that had to improve the onboarding experience because HR said you were onboarded after 6 weeks, and in fact, it took more like 6 months. So, and comms went in and helped, said, actually, we can help you tie this together in a more seamless way, and they became, and suddenly the head of HR was much more interested in working with them because you helped solve one of their problems, right? So.
And it's a huge moment, because I think this is the moment where people decide if they're going to stay in the company or if they're going to leave it again, because there's some great data on this saying that if you have a great onboarding experience, I think it's like 60% more likely that you will stay on for 3 years.
Yes.
And that's really interesting. And then the leader, as you mentioned, really important also for the experience at work. So 70% of the experience at work is actually defined by the leader, and 20% of people, they leave because of the leader. So that's also where we have to focus. And my experience in internal comms has been that I had a lot of people in my team working on informing and doing content, but not so many people focusing on helping leaders, communicate. So that's something to focus on as well.
We have a quick follow-up question. Sophie is asking, are we skilled enough to utilize the opportunities from behavior design to support the business? I think it may have fallen out for some of what I said earlier, and maybe also you, that we should start looking at that kind of data. I don't think communicators and the teams they work in are necessarily themselves, but I think you could, even if you don't get a full-time analyst, very often businesses have them walking around doing other stuff. See if you can talk to them for, 3 hours or half a day, and get some insights on what, how you can get set up with even a basic kind of setup to try and I, if you're interested, I have some examples of people who've done that, and we can talk later.
Yeah, but if you talk about skills in terms of understanding behaviors and so on, I think that's some of the things. That's some of the areas where we should step up as communicators as well. I have myself had I think I started to learn about behavioral science in 2004 or 5, and something that's really been helpful to me in delivering comms in the future. And that's something we need to focus on as communicators as well, not only change people.
And actually, often when we run campaigns in companies, it's not just to inform people of something; it's actually to get them to do something, right? Yeah. It's to provoke a reaction. It's to get cause a behavioral change. Remember to wear your staff badge, or whatever it is. And some of the tricks used by marketers for decades, they're actually pretty, effective and not that difficult to follow. So there's a lot to be learned from, maybe not from journalists, but from marketers sometimes, looking at they've quite proven methods of how to actually get people to do stuff. And
yes, and I think there's definitely something to learn from also the way they do content, for instance, and so on. Okay, let's move on. Let's look at these two people, because this is actually an example of an outcome of people who have a great experience at work. These two stewards, they work at Southwest Airlines. I don't know if someone of you have been flying with Southwest, but it's a US-based company, and some of these stewards and stewardesses, they do some great announcements before takeoff, and which are very hilarious. You can see a lot of them on YouTube, actually. So the interesting thing about this is not so much the fact that they do these things, but it's the fact that Southwest, they try to figure out, okay, what kind of revenue does that give us, anything on revenue or whatever? What does it lead to? So they looked at all the data they had available, and they figured out that the customers who or the travelers who experience this kind of entertainment on board, they became more loyal customers. So they figured out that this actually had a positive effect on their revenue of $140 million. They got $140 million more because of employees who did this. So passionate employees and engaged employees, I mean, and having a culture where this is allowed, that can actually end up giving you something on the bottom line. And the interesting part of with Southwest also is that the culture is totally, in sync with this, because what they do is, for instance, on the headquarters, they share some of the great quotes from these stewards and stewardesses on board and so on. So everything is actually aligned so that people get a feeling of that this is actually allowed and something we would like people to do. So let me give some examples of how can we help give people an experience at work where people feel that this is a great place to work. Because I think one of the things we can do, of course, is to create some great content. That's where we come from. But we also compete with a lot of other things. So as I talked earlier on, the smartphone here, it makes us, it brings us some fierce competition from Facebook and YouTube and others, where people can quickly, turn to something else that they want to see that's more exciting, that's more funny, and so on. So we have to figure out how can we cut through the noise. And that trend, I normally use this overview so that you can start thinking about, what should you actually try to transform. So I think a lot of the things that we do in internal comms is we inform a lot, and we send a lot of instructions and a lot of information. And sometimes we need to do that. For instance, in the COVID-19 crisis, we have to inform a lot, because there's a lot of things that have to be totally, correctly communicated. But there's also a lot of things that we normally would do that we don't necessarily have to inform about, but where we should focus about entertainment or inspiration instead. I'll try to give you some examples. This, for instance, is not necessarily something that's done by internal comms, but it's a great example of how you can turn something that you can communicate in a boring way into a great experience. It's Grundfos, who invites the employees who have 20, 25 years and 40 years anniversary at work. They will be picked up by Paul Due Jensen, who is the founder of Grundfos. His car, he's dead now, Paul Due Jensen, but they still have his car. So the employee is going to be picked up and be driven to work, where the colleagues are standing and waving with flags, and they will eat breakfast together, and Mads Nipper, the CEO, will invite will congratulate and so on. The person will be driven home again and be invited for a meal, and they will also be told some stories about Grundfos and so on when they are being picked up. This is a great way of storytelling. It's a great way of giving people an experience at work that this company is really celebrating people who are staying here for a longer period of time. But you could also just have sent out a letter and saying congratulations with the 25 years anniversary. Here's a paycheck of 3,000 kroner or something. but they choose to do something differently. And I think this is a great way to think and see, can we do something else? Can we transform something into a great experience? And again, this might not be the responsibility for internal comms, but why not? I mean, if we have this mindset, why not challenge it?
It's also, if you actually want to connect the, because in this case, of course, he was a big name in the company. I've also seen examples where the organization, instead of giving someone, you could have an ideas initiative, innovation initiative. You ask all your employees to submit ideas about, I don't know, savings or the next year's products or whatever. Instead of just, you could give them an iPad or, for the best ideas, but actually bringing them in to the head office and meet the people who are then going to actually, make that idea happen. And that has, when we've, done the research afterwards, always proven to be a much, much more appreciated gesture. We don't need another gadget. We need somebody to recognize and appreciate what we're doing. And I think that's
exactly. That's totally right. Another example is that's an idea I came up with. Actually, it was never implemented, but I think still it's quite funny. But for instance, let's go back to the onboarding part, the onboarding experience. So if you've hired a new employee, that what we often experience is that we are being sent like 7 folders in an annual report. Why not, buy a couple of virtual reality glasses, make some VR movies, and let these new employees experience the company in a new way, because that's where they are most motivated. So give them an experience that they remember. Maybe take a tour of the office or whatever makes sense. But I think this could be a great way of storytelling as well. This is also an example of how to inspire people about what's the right things to do in the company. Daniel, who is the head of communications at Scandic, he had to. Or he recognized the person who was chosen to be the one in Scandic who was the best at customer service. I think is the best way to say it. But instead of communicating that on the internet, he took it to LinkedIn and made a little movie with Ahmed. And Ahmed told a bit about what he thinks is a good customer service. And as you can see, it gave a lot of positive results, also a lot of views. I think it ended up getting about 30,000 views actually. But actually it ended up being a really, really inspiring piece for people externally of Scandic, but it also became an employer branding piece for people who would like to work in Scandic. But it also, was an internal communication piece, because this is a way to recognize a person who's doing something great in Scandic. So there was a lot of proud employees who was engaged in this post as well. And Ahmed, he ended up becoming a guest at the internal events and Scandic, where he speaks about customer service now. So this is the level we can take it to as communicators as well. Then we have Mark Zuckerberg, who recently he just did an internal town hall on external social media, obviously on Facebook. But that's also something that I found really interesting to think about. Is can you actually take that external, and what would that actually lead to? That would be, I guess, internal social media meets external, internal communication meets external communication meets employer value branding or employer branding. Again, so these things are merging. We can see that all the ways. Then when I was in Russia to speak, I think there are actually some people from Russia joining this today. I saw this great example of someone doing a corporate Netflix series, trying to create a great story about bureaucracy in organizations, and this was done in a very, very engaging way, and that people just wanted to see. And I think it was like a four series story, and it was just very different and very, very interesting to see that this is also the level you can take it to in internal comms. And Arla has, and I think TUI does the same. I guess there's a couple of other examples as well, but they have actually transformed some of the boring presentations that executives sometimes do, and transformed them into so-called internal TED Talks, where they speak about something that's much more emotional and that's much more high level. So, for instance, Natalie here, she's speaking about transparency. She was the CFO of Arla, but she talked about transparency, but in a very entertaining and engaging way in 20-30 minutes no boring slides, only picture slides and so on. So that was a really great experience for people. All right. So last thing that I think we should focus on is how do we actually come from producing some great outputs to make impact. One of the first things I think we should do is to just don't do it right away. Just step out of the hamster wheel for a while and reflect, so that you are able to look at the things that you do today and prioritize the current activities that you do. And then you should identify, where you can add the most value together with the business, and then measure the right things. Sounds easier than it is, and establish a rhythm with the stakeholders that you're working with. What I did, yeah.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts, because you say you say it sounds easier than it is, but I also think sometimes we overcomplicate that one, and just I'll give you one example, and there's many more, but it's just to kind of jog your memories as you go back and think about how, because I think this is one of the big challenges we have. How can we know we're making an impact, but how do we demonstrate it to people who are making it? They might not see it because they're typically not the users of much of what we do. But recently, there was a company in New York, Bloomberg. It's not they've actually been out bragging about the things they've done outside of the business as well. But they had a guy who was being challenged. The head of security in the buildings. Because there's been a lot of bomb scares there. And so they had a head of security who had a lot of trouble with getting all this staff in the building to comply with all of the various restrictions and regulations. And they offered their help to actually run a campaign about very basic stuff. Remember to wear your badge, all of these things. The guy hadn't thought of it, and his KPI was, you need to lift the performance in this area by 25%. I can't remember, 25% more. Do the people need to actually comply with wearing their badges, remembering all the processes and so forth? And they did it. And this guy, the head of security has, authority. He loved what they did for him. So he was obviously talking to everybody else about it. So they started small. And I think that's the last thing I'd say is, if you start something new, like trying to find new ways of measuring your impact, start with one little thing, because you can easily end up in a very complicated kind of scenario if you have too many wheels and metrics.
Yeah, agree. Agree. The security guy didn't need to know about all the analytics that came out of the tool. It was not about page views or impressions or time spent on the page. It was about lifting performance that he cared about. That was a business metric, right? That's that's right. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so the way I approached that when I was working in internal comms was to have a look at what were we actually doing, what was strategic important, and what opportunities did we have to influence on buyer behavior. So we tried to look at all the tasks we had, and we put them in this framework, and saw that a lot of the things that we did were actually down in the red herring section, or the something section. So we had a discussion about how can we actually lift the quality of internal comms, and that was the first way to establish a mindset about what is a big win actually, what is standard communication, what should we focus on, where is it okay to say no, that's something you should do yourself. So that was a great way to start, and then we started to meet with the executives from each area that we were supporting. Had a discussion around what is it that you want to achieve this year? What are your challenges? Not talking about communication at all, just listen, and then go back and discuss how can we help this person? How can we help this department? And then we filled out this area. Normally, we would come back with 3 focus areas we think that we can support, and describe why is it important. Mostly describe it in his or her own words. And then try to explain what are we going to do and how are we going to do it, and what kind of goals are we supporting by this. And that was a good way for us to get started and get some goodwill in the different departments with the executives, because that was our plan together. And we said to them, this is what we're going to do, and if you want us to do something else, we have to figure out what we're not going to do. But this is what we sign off on. and then we try to figure out what should we measure, and what you talked about, Laura, again, reach and so on. It's very often the easiest things to measure, but might be the wrong things to measure because it doesn't really indicate if you've succeeded with what you're doing.
It depends on what you use it for, right? You know, numbers for us is really important because it tells us something about the performance of our channel, but it doesn't tell the boss anything about whether it has an impact on the bottom line. So there's a translation there, you know.
Yes. You have to know if it has a pulse up, obviously, but if you just stop there, you might not really know if what you do has an impact. That's what I'm trying to say here with this funnel here, is that, you know, when we communicate, we create some output, and then we have some outtakes where we measure if people read things or if they have understood it. But what we really want people to do is to do something most of the times. That's an outcome. And then finally see, you know, what kind of impact does this actually have on the organization, like the example with Southwest Airlines, for instance, with $140 million, or if people stay longer in the business, or if they sell more. That's a great case that I don't have with me today, is but the Danish company 3, who managed to, just with a bit of a different way of communicating, they actually managed to increase sales by 25% in stores and so on. That was really interesting. So it's possible, but I think this is also, again, some examples from Kyla's posts on LinkedIn, is that we also experienced that maybe there can be a challenge. Maybe we understand this is the right thing to do, but maybe the business doesn't understand it. That's another challenge. So again, it's very, very important to make this alignment with the stakeholders and try to address this in the right way. And most people get it, and most people understand it when you approach this. But you just also have to be aware of not being too focused on the output and outtakes part yourself when you speak with stakeholders. And then it's about establishing a rhythm with your stakeholders once you have the plan. So, you know, once you've adjusted and signed off the plan, it's about following up monthly with these with your stakeholders, just saying, this is what we've done, this is what results we've created, and follow up quarterly on the goals, see if it's the right things that you're doing, and then just evaluate every year and see if it's going in the right direction, and then start again, listen to the leadership team. This is the way you start creating a great relationship, I would say. That's my experience as well.
And I think when you report, I agree completely. And when you report back to some of the stakeholders and those you're doing the work for, only put in there, I mean, this should, again, it's probably 1.0 knowledge to communicators, but I see quite often that you put a lot more detail in there than they need to know, right? This reporting piece is really about saying, you asked for this is what we've done, right? Rather than saying, then we had they'll get lost in the numbers, and it'll be, you know, we had someone in a group recently who was pitching, he said, I've got to go back and show my board this. It was full of numbers, it was very detailed, and they all said, you know, we think it's great, it's very interesting, but it's not sexy, it's not going to sell. So you know, and it's
you're right now, because this is what I normally would show this to the executive level, and behind that I would have a very detailed plan in Excel with all the activities that we're doing, but I'm not going to bore them with that. So once that is in place, you can go out and just do it. And then I think there are 4 things to be very focused on and actually do, is to get back on the floor. You know, not sitting too much around the headquarters, because sometimes you get blindsided by being there. Start to go out in the business and meet people, and start networking across the organizations, and find out what people's challenges are, and see if you can sometimes, you know, collaborate and stuff. Sometimes also it's a matter of that. Sometimes we have reduced budgets in the organizations, but if we joined forces, we might be able to do something that's even better and more impactful. And then continuously evaluate the strategy, the channels and resources you need. Actually, as I talk about, is just now is press the restart button, get out of the hamster wheel, see if you can restart and start with a more strategic approach in internal comms. And then nobody knows what's the right thing to do. So that's why we need to be brave and experiment and see what works in your organization, and then never stop to try new things out. And you will fail, but you will also learn, and then you will just have to stand up and try something new again.
2 final comments from me as well. It's important to see what works in your organizations. It's also sometimes really useful to see what works in other organizations. So,
Yeah.
and this is me plugging the fact that, joining sessions like these is obviously one thing, but also try and get involved in professional networks, because there you will have people who are actually, sharing some of the things they've done. And I think when time is our most precious resource, don't make the same mistakes as other people have made already. It's harder to find out because it's behind the firewall when you're talking about internal communications, but that's where you can find out through certain networks and so forth. And also think about what you can let go of. In other words, are you doing tasks today that actually, if you're really honest, they may not bring that much value to the business? And are there ways you can either offload them or subcontract them? Or
yeah, agree. And that's just a reminder for you to look at the offer section actually here, where you can join some of the webinars that you do now in Connect Minds, right? It's free, so it doesn't cost you anything. It's have a look at it, and if you like, at some point you can join the groups.
What we do there is not so much a presentation like today, which it's more a discussion. So we have some big topics. One on Monday is on how to use the top task approach. If some of you have heard of Jerry McGovern and his top task approach to website design, or any web design, but they were called in to do it on the WHO side at the beginning of the pandemic. And you can imagine, old clunky site, and suddenly they had to get, and the focus there will be on how do you actually create a design that works when you have perpetual change, and you have the pandemic changing at different paces in different parts of the world. So even if you're a global organization with one kind of comms team, they have to communicate different things in different ways about the different, and the website design needs to kind of cater for that. So there's a really interesting session on that on Monday, but there's a whole program of stuff. But it's more discussion. There will be experts talking, but it's very much based on discussion. So it's a Zoom call.
Great. Fantastic.
Thank you.
I think that's all for now. And people are going to other meetings right now. I can see that.
Yeah.
Fine. That's how it is.
Well,
so thank you for joining, and I hope you found this inspiring. And if you want more, you can jump over to a new webinar with Lau in the future. And I will.
Yeah, and also, I mean, even if you don't attend the webinar, feel free to reach out, because I can always ask the network questions if you want to get some feedback and input, references, other things.
Great. Thanks for now.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye now.